I know a rogue when I see a rogue, and I've no desire to die in the company of a rogue. Have you had any desire to die in the company of a rogue? I'd rather not die at all. I know the feeling. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Power of Kroll, written by Robert Holmes and directed by Norman Stewart, who previously directed Underworld, the season prior. This is the fifth story in the massive Key to Time story arc, in which the Doctor and his companions Romana and K9 are searching for the segments of the Key to Time to stop the Black Guardian from creating chaos in the universe. This is a 4-part adventure, and it is considered by many as one of the weakest and one of the most boring stories in the whole of Doctor Who canon. You can see that, I don't know, it's hard to describe, really, but if you are kind of tired of hearing people bashing this story, though I still think it's a pretty weak story. It is incredibly dull and incredibly just not that interesting for the most part. I do think there are some great elements here that a lot of people overshadow, maybe for good reason, but there are some things to like in this story. So the first thing what happens is that the Doctor and Romana, they land on one of the moons of Delta, what's the planet called? Delta Magna. And what's happened is that this oil refinery have basically taken over the planet and been sent these like savages, what they call the Swampies, onto the moon. But they've discovered there is a source of methane on the moon, and so they've come to the moon, and the Swampies don't like this because they feel like they're going to get chucked out on the moon. And every thousands of years, a giant beast known as Kroll comes out and attacks people, whether it's the oil refinement or the Swampies themselves. And so the Doctor and Romana arrive, and first of all, because it's a swamp, no K9. K9 is hardly in this story, but don't feel too bad. John Layson, the guy who plays K9, actually plays a different character, Duggan, one of the oil refinements. He doesn't get a lot to do, but it's nice to see him play with his actual face, even if it's strange that K9's voice is kind of coming out and speaking like a normal person. I wish he had a little bit more to do, but that's more wishful thinking than an actual critique of the story. And let's talk about like the setting, because that's a huge part of this story. The story was shot, I actually don't know where it's shot, but it's a massive swamp, and you got to see all these giant leaves that reach up over Tom Baker, which is he's a very tall man, so that's impressive. And you get a lot of swampy areas, and you get some of the sets for the Swampies village, and you get another set for the refinery. Now, a big criticism with this story is that the setting is just not that interesting. I kind of disagree. For the first few moments or so, it's actually really cool. We've never seen a Doctor Who story that looks like this before, that's set in a situation like this before. In terms of the outdoor location, I think it actually is pretty decent, and director Norman Stewart, he does a pretty okay job at working around the forestry and the sewers and stuff. So not the sewers, the swamps. So that's really cool, and does some pretty decent job at just getting the camera around and stuff. The main issue is, there's two main issues. The main one, in my opinion, is that when we are in location, on sets, something about it just doesn't add up, and everything feels unoriginal, uninspired, and just not that, just not interesting. The refinery just looks like any other Doctor Who set, a bit generic. The swampy, the inside of the swampy's village just looks just really uninspired and tacked on. There's a funny little story in which, when I say story, funny little fact about the story is that in part 3, the Doctor makes a comment about how terrible the architecture is, because there's a window on the roof that doesn't match up with everything. And during this, the head of BBC looked at the set and thought they were so terrible that the designer of the sets was immediately fired and was told to never work on Doctor Who again, which is a bit dramatic. He's done some pretty good sets before. I can't remember his name, but he has done some pretty good sets before. It's just this story he was caught on a bad timing, which is really strange because Norman Stewart worked before on the Underworld. He had a lot of set work, and some of the shots on that looked really good. But here, the set work just seems really bland and forgettable. And that's the big thing to note about the story. It is highly generic in terms of its plots and just its atmosphere and everything. Like I said, there's some good scenery, but nothing really in particularly stands out. So the Doctor and Romana get separated because Romana, having trouble with the key to time locator, goes up to the mountains and gets captured by the Swampies. Another story in which Romana just doesn't catch a break. Mary Tam, I feel really bad for Mary Tam because she has such a great character that she can work with, but the writing always seems to let her down. Whether this will continue to the end, we will find out in the Armageddon Factor and in a audio drama, which I'll talk about that when we get there. So maybe Big Finish could improve her, and I can see why she didn't stay on, because she didn't want to be the cliched companion, and she was starting off in terms of her character very well, this kind of smart Time Lord travelling with the Doctor, only to her to feel much more like a usual cliched companion. But because she's supposed to be a lot more smarter, it doesn't really gel with the rest of just her in general, and it does feel like she's always gets the short end of the stick. So she gets captured by the Swampies, and she has to become part of a sacrifice. And here she also meets somebody who sells guns, and he claims that the guns have come from the Sons of Earth, a group of people that want to see the Swampies get rebelled against the human people, or as they call it, the Dryfoots. And it's also here she gets introduced to the Swampy leader and his second in command and all those people, and none of them seem to stand out. Nothing really is interesting about them. Nothing. They just seem really bland and forgettable, which is a shame because Robert Holmes is a fantastic writer. I think it's important to note as well, this story was, in its defence, was a very last addition to the scripts. Originally, this slot was supposed to be taken by a story by famous scriptwriter Ted Lewis, most known for writing Get Carter. If anyone's seen that, it's really good. And he was supposed to write the Doctor Who story, but it was never completed. I don't think we knew what the title of it was, and we got this story instead. And Robert Holmes had to like really rush the writing. So yeah, the characters here are just not particularly interesting on the swampy side. Is everything on the other side alright? Well, the Doctor gets captured by the oil refinement because they tracked another ship coming down. They tracked the ship of the gun runner, and they captured the Doctor, believing that he was the gun runner. So they take him to the refinement place, and they basically explain every little detail. My God, this story makes you feel like that they think that you are extremely interested in methane collecting. It's just, nothing really stands out about these characters, but apart from, they just, the problem with the oil refinement characters is that they explain way too much, and we don't get anything much to do with character with them until round about part 3, maybe the ending of part 4, depending on your point of view. One of them, as I've stated, is played by John Leeson. Another one is played by legendary Doctor Who guest star Philip Maddock, who I've mentioned before is one of my favourite Doctor Who guest performers. Most knownly, he plays Solomon in The Brains of Morbius. Here he doesn't get a lot to do. He just seems there to look angry most of the time, until the very end of the story, in which he has a confrontation with his higher-ups. And he's probably the most likeable out of them all. John Leeson's character seems to have no interest whatsoever apart from the scanners and stuff. Philip Maddock's character, who I can't remember his name, he does mention at one point that despite he doesn't like the Swampies, he doesn't want to see them get murdered. And then we get the leader character, who I can't remember his name, but he's played by legendary actor Neil McCarthy. He's been on Doctor Who before. He played somebody in The Minds of Evil, and this would be his last Doctor Who appearance, and it would be one of his latest roles before he would become famous for playing the devil character in the film The Clash of the Titans. So that's a really cool fact. And yeah, he's one of the greatest British actors of all time. And he's absolutely wasted here. I cannot describe how disappointed I was to see him there, to see this phenomenal actor, just basically at the height of his reign, being on one of my favourite shows, and being one of the leader characters, being one of the, basically the star, basically one of the villains of the story. And he's just so forgettable, bland, and just... So, yeah, there's not much really to talk to it. So yeah, there's not really much to talk to in terms of plot. Romana almost gets sacrifices. The Doctor escapes and saves Romana, which is the cliffhanger for part 1. The actual cliffhanger itself is actually pretty good, pretty decent, and it was very well shot. It's in the dark. Romana is tied up, and you can see, like, on the side of the screen, this creature with bug arms and stuff coming up to Romana, just about to kill her. Pretty decent cliffhanger. Only when part 2 arrives, the Doctor comes in, and we get another shot of it further away, and it looks really stupid, and it's later revealed, and it's revealed pretty early on in part 2 that it was actually a dressing for a Swampy. And the plan was to basically warm her up to be a sacrifice to Kroll, so that Kroll can attack the refinery. And so the Doctor saves her, and they find a book at the end of a well which details the mythology of the Swampies, and they learn, it's here they learn that Kroll is the Doctor theorizes it's real anyway, and that it sleeps for like thousands of years and it's ginormous, and they explain that Kroll ate the power of Kroll, which made him so powerful, and what it does then is that it basically becomes a god, as the Swampies mythology entails, and that's pretty cool. I like the little mythology feeling of the Kroll, and when you find out that the power of the Kroll, the symbol of Kroll, is the key to time, it makes the actual key itself feel much more mythical compared to previous stories in the arc, because this is one where we actually see the key in its effect, and you see its effect very well, because when we see Kroll, because Kroll wakes up from its slumber, we see this giant monster just on the horizon, and it's a pretty decent effect, if I must say. Like, look at that. That is, for 1979, that's a pretty decent effect right there. So, yeah. So, there's this whole, like, war going on, and the Swampies discover that the guns they were using were defective, and this, the gunringer guy also gets sent to sacrifice him, because it turns out that he wasn't actually working for the Sons of Earth at all. He just saw these people needed weapons and took advantage of it. And it's also revealed that he actually works for Neil McCarthy's character. And Neil McCarthy's wanted to basically give a reason to annihilate the Swampies, because now they have weapons and now he can go be attacking them in self-defense. And we get a little bit more character in terms of Neil McCarthy's character, but it happens way too late in the story. The Doctor, Romana, and this character, they get tortured by basically getting tied up to this thing and getting pulled until their spine breaks. Like I've said before, this is the scene in which the Doctor criticises the architecture. Here, Tom Baker, his bombastic nature really shines through in this particular scene, in which all the characters are talking about the death and like the types of death, because they were sentenced to one version of punishment by Kroll or something like that. I can't really remember it, and they're all that, and the Doctor's just moping about the architecture, really bringing out the Tom Baker out in his story. But let's talk about Tom Baker in his story, because despite him having some really great Tom Bakery moments, this is probably the first story in which, in my opinion anyway, he isn't always at his best. A lot of scenes, especially on the on-location scenes, which, as I mentioned before, the location scenes actually look pretty decent in this story, if a bit overused. But what puts it down is that Tom Baker seems to be off his game a bit. He seems a bit tired and a bit worn out. He seems a bit not as bombastic, and sometimes that can be really good, especially when you've got a much more serious story. But here it feels less like the Doctor's taking it seriously, and more than Tom Baker's being a bit just really not interested in this particular story. And yeah, it's a shame, because, you know, Tom Baker had a very great streak of stories in terms of his performance. And it was up, and it's here where you can feel that Tom Baker might be a bit wearing a bit thin, at least in terms of this story. But yeah, so the Doctor escapes, and he basically tries to tell everybody that Kroll isn't a god. He's just this giant animal thing. And he tries to get them all into the refinery to try and not only take down the people, because they're going to set off a bomb that will destroy everyone, basically, because they're trying to mass slaughter the Swampies, but also to protect them from Kroll, who is just randomly attacking people, feeding off their remains. And it's also here that there's a bit of a debate going on. And here, the story does kind of pick up, because we do get a little bit more character on the human side, as John Leeson and Philip Maddox's characters don't want to see the Swampies getting hurt. They're a bit, this is mad, this is insane, this is just pure evil. Sure, our work is important, but murder? Are we really going to go that low? But Neil McCarthy's character is just hell-bent on destroying the Swampies. He's basically a giant racist. It is important to note that this story has a lot of, just has a discussion on colonialism and how, and represents previous British conquering of savage civilizations, and like stuff with the Native Americans, and that's what this story is kind of like inspired by, like the Native Americans and African tribes and stuff, and how British colonialism and just colonialism in general just doesn't benefit these kinds of people. And it does a pretty good job at detailing its points, its moral. It's just, but the characters and the people that we belong to in terms of the story, the people that we are supposed to follow, just don't have a lot of character to keep us interested in whether they would live or die. So there's about to set off a bomb, and the Doctor defuses it, and also Neil McCartney character gets killed by one of the Swampies, and so they're trying to stop the bomb. But now that the bomb is not going off, there's nothing stopping Kroll from just eating away. But the Doctor has a theory, and he takes the stick for the key to time, and he goes up to fight Kroll. Now, I don't know if this is a Nelson Mandela effect, but I distinctly remember when the Doctor goes up to have a face-to-face confrontation with it, that it speaks English. And I'm sure I've heard somewhere that the creature was voiced by Philip Maddox. But watching it this time around, nothing like that happened. So I don't know if my memory is faulty or anything like that. If anybody remembers this, please let me know. I would love to know where I've gotten this from. But anyway, the Doctor has a decent battle with Kroll, as the key to time's tracker gets knocked out of his hand, and the Doctor has to grab it and push it up to Kroll's face, and when it bursts into light, he gets the fifth segment to the key, to which he takes back to Romana, ending our story. And yeah, so that's the power of Kroll. Overall, like I said, it's a really weak story. It is justifiably considered one of the most boring and just not an interesting story of the classic era. Probably one of the most, easily the weakest Fourth Doctor adventure, especially considering that Tom Baker's off his game in this story. But, however, there are some great things to like about this story that do get overviewed, maybe because the rest of it is so generic. But I do think there's a lot to love about the story. The effects on Kroll, for one thing, is really good. Though they're not good in this story, it is nice to see both Philip Maddock and Neil McCarthy working alongside each other, and John Leeson having a appearing in person in a story for once. But not very lot to talk about. It's not really bad. It's not like it's horrible. It's not like it's got a terrible message. It's just bland and boring. That's the thing to take away from this story. So there you go. That's the power of Kroll. So join me next time for the conclusion of the Key to Time story arc, as the Doctor and Romana get caught up in a 1,000-year war. I think it's 1,000 years. Just a very long war, and they must help protect the princess of one of the sides. So join me next time for the Armageddon Factor. See you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da.